One of the things that is really intriguing with where we've come from is that the reality is that a lot has changed in the human industry. A lot has changed with what consumers really, really want. People don't view these as just pets anymore. They're members of the household. And that has changed not only what they're educated about and what they care about, but obviously how pet foods are manufactured. The good thing is that there is a diversity of options that are out there, and the more we understand about what's appropriate for the animal, the more we can educate consumers about what's appropriate for them as they make. So to do that, I think it's always really important to start off by reminding ourselves, what are those essential nutrients? What are those things that we want to be focused on? Some which we see in the actual food, and some, frankly, that we don't. You look at this slide here, and water and oxygen are first listed. Those are by definition nutrients, and nutrients that are essential to these animals' capability of surviving. Certainly then we get into energy, whether that comes in the source of protein, fat, or carbohydrates. And then importantly, but not often talked about, we really want to talk about the micronutrients, the vitamins, the minerals, the prebiotics. Those functional ingredients provide huge benefits to the animal, and sometimes they're just not talked about enough, and owners don't understand. So as you can see here, there's a whole number of different nutrients that make up overall feed intake, and understanding their role and understanding their importance is a vital source of understanding the quality of the products that we're looking at, and the short and most importantly, the long-term implications of those nutrients. So let's start off with talking with energy. Energy is obviously what we need to support basic bodily functions, activities, and what we replace as we use it. The trade-off of too little energy is obviously lack of survival, but the opposite of that is excessive energy when not utilized leads to obesity, which we know is a significant issue in today's pet population. Crucial factors that are tied to energy needs can all be tied to, again, the individual. Age, metabolic need, how efficiently are they using these, how much calories are they getting, how much calories are they burning, what are the environmental factors. So there are a huge number of variables that will have an impact on how quickly and frankly how effectively animals utilize. So the root of energy is obviously protein, and it's something that we do talk a lot about, and we really want to understand as much as we possibly can, because again, when I say protein, we want to remember that that's nothing more than a long string of amino acids, really the building blocks of the body. These amino acids build, maintain, repair bodily tissues, as well as serve as an energy source. There's around 20 primary with many multiple secondary types of essential and non-essential amino acids. And this is one area that's important to differentiate between cats and dogs, is that dogs require 23 essential amino acids and cats actually require 24. That's why with any high quality cat food, you're going to see the additional formulation and inclusion of taurine. Now specifically to Blackwood, Blackwood uses a variety of different animal protein sources, which is good, but it's really at the end of the day important to understand why the type and the quality of the ingredients is so important. You can certainly get protein from grains, and that may be appropriate in certain species and in certain quantities, but we also know that by definition animal proteins have a more appropriate balance of amino acids and a more readily absorbable protein source than when we talk about plant proteins. So again, with protein, it's really important to not get caught up in the quality of the protein. Yes, that's something that we want to look at, but the quantity of protein. What we really want to focus on is the quality of that protein, or what's a lot of times defined as the biological value. That's what really determines the nutritional impact to the animal. Digestibility, the utilization of amino acids. So diets that are formulated with low biological proteins have issues and need additional supplementation. And commonly we think about that with plant-based proteins. Yes, they do provide protein, but they provide protein that contains limited amino acids, and therefore we need to supplement with other amino acids. In general terms, animal sources always have a broader based amino acid profile that ties to the high quality component of it, and especially when we're talking about dogs and especially cats, the more animal proteins we can bring to the nutritional profile, nutritionally, most of the time, the higher the quality. We also then want to talk about fats, and fats sometimes get bad connotations, but fats are truthfully crucial for many, many normal body functions. not only are they energy, and at times they're some of the most calorically dense, highly palatable sources of energy, they also are essential to carry fat-soluble vitamins like vitamin D. It also makes it possible for other nutrients to do their job. So there's lots of synergies when we think about fats functionality in the body. So animals absolutely need fats. The type and the quantity are what we want to be conscientious of. And as we think about Blackwood products, commonly they're going to use chicken fats, they're going to use eggs and chicken meal, all of which provide great diversification of fats and also additional protein and meat. Moving on from there, we can talk about carbohydrates, and this is obviously one of the largest overall body of nutrients, and one that gets a lot of discussion, a lot of debate in the pet food energy or pet food category. But at the root of it, this is a potential energy source for the body. There's three common forms of carbohydrates: sugars, starches, and fibers. And furthermore, we want to understand the different impacts to the body in terms of the types of those carbohydrates. More of the simple carbohydrates, think about things like simple sugars, refined cereals. They're quick and easy for the body to digest. Whereas more of the complex carbohydrates, which many times are plant-based, are slower to digest, larger molecules such as vegetables, so on and so forth. All of these can play an important and appropriate role in the nutritional profile of diets for dogs and cats. What's important is to remember how much and in what format as we to the species. So carbohydrates wise, we want to remember that protein and fat should always be the main energy sources in any carnivorous species diet. As we get excessive amounts of carbohydrates, that can very, very quickly lead to excessive amounts of obesity, gets stored as fat, and it causes problems. We also know that because we use extrusion as a common manufacturing practice, that does require starch. So finding that healthy blend of the right types and the right quantities for the species we're feeding is essential. And if you look at the diversity of Blackwood's products, they're going to use ingredients such as brown rice, oat groats, rice bran, others along those lines as their starch sources, which again do provide fiber and eventually provide energy. So as we look at sources of carbohydrates, it's really important to again remember that a lot of times it's not necessarily the whole grain, but components of the grain. In general, though, whole grains are preferred. When we start to see fractions of grains, we start to lose some of the nutritional benefits of whole grains. So in general terms, we prefer to stick with whole grains. That preserves the bran, helps ensure fiber, which maintains gut motility, and also has somewhat of a limitation or a control factor in how calories are absorbed. When we get into more of the fractions of fiber, it changes the nutritional profile and can lead to irregular digestion, inappropriate metabolism, excessive storage of fat, not always, but things that we want to be aware of. As we cook or we extrude products, it absolutely changes the digestibility. And that's what sometimes makes starches an okay ingredient because of the digestibility change in the animal's ability to utilize. However, it's really about the specific species that we're feeding and ensuring that we're choosing the right. So again, as we've talked about with carbohydrates, just a massive diversity of different functionalities that are associated with that. You've got everything from nitrogen-free extract, which is predominantly the plant cell wall components, as you can see over here on the left. And then you've got crude fiber, which gets more into the hemicellulose, the insoluble components of fiber, all of which play vital roles in gut functionality, metabolism, nutrients, fermentation, which is an important factor associated with many. So now that we've kind of defined those core nutrients, at the end of the day, why is nutrition so important for our species? Well, as I started off this presentation by saying, it is the single most important decision that any pet owner is going to make. And therefore, we want to ensure that they have as much information, as much education as is possible before they make this key essential decision. At the root of that, we know that when we think about dogs and cats, some of the most common diseases that we see are directly associated to nutrition, whether that be obesity or GI disease, dental disease, skin disease, issues associated with the urinary tract. And as we get many animals living longer, we begin to see more things associated with osteoarthritis or degenerative joint disease. And the reality is that all of these diseases are directly or indirectly related to nutrition. So even if we feed animals nutritionally appropriate, It doesn't necessarily mean that we're not going to see one of these diseases. However, if we are focused on nutrition, the likelihood is lower, the significance of the impact to the animal is a lot of times less, and we likely have a better chance of controlling it or having a positive impact on that animal's quality of life. Issues that we're going to face, and it is an issue that leads to massive amount of disease, shortened lifespan, and a negative impact of quality of life. You know, the studies are out there. We know that the amount of obesity in our pet populations is significant. You know, specifically here in the United States, the AVMA, the APPA, as well as other organizations consistently look at this factor. And as you can see over this historical perspective, it is a growing concern. A growing concern because of its correlation to so many chronic diseases: arthritis, diabetes, hypothyroidism in cats, chronic renal disease. And in so many of these situations, these are diseases that once they have initiated, we can't correct them, we can't control them. Consumers at the end of the day have a disrupted perception of what is normal in terms of weight for their animals. People don't understand the implications of this. But the reality is it's a very simple equation. If we provide excessive calories to the animal beyond what they are using based on lifestyle, age, activity, so on and so forth, those calories are converted to fat. This is a survival mechanism that isn't going to change. So being conscientious of caloric intake, being conscientious of the calories being utilized, and where that balance sits is, again, a single and very, very, very essential decision for every owner to understand. And again, one that once that process changes can be adapted, can be adjusted, recognizing trying to keep animals at a target weight or a target weight range is, again, one of the most important things that owners are to understand that. We also know, as I alluded to you earlier, that nutrition connects directly to disease. You know, we look at the most common diseases that we see in the marketplace every single year, and we run down these lists and we realize that year over year, 7, 8, 9 out of the top 10 are directly or indirectly associated to nutrition. It's just, again, how important this decision is and how much we need to ensure that owners understand the implications. Now, as we look at pet food labeling and marketing, you know, we're provided a certain amount of information on every single label. And understanding what that information tells us is essential. It's really important to understand the difference between as-fed and dry matter, because depending on the type of food, if we're looking at a canned food versus looking at a dry extruded food, how that ingredient profile is labeled has a big implication in terms of understanding. We cannot look at as-fed and compare to dry matter, you know, because they're not the same depending on the format of the food. We really have to remove the moisture components of food to be able to compare on a dry matter basis, to truly be able to understand what are the nutrients implications to the guaranteed analysis: fiber, fat, protein, so on. Let's talk a little bit about raw, and again, a still small component of the marketplace, but certainly a component of the marketplace that is growing. Not cooked, so we're going to typically have more cost associated with this, more difficulty in processing, but that certainly allows us to maintain the most natural format to many of these different types of foods. We don't need starch because, again, we're not extruding. Typically, palatability is high because with a higher animal protein inclusion, we typically find that most animals find that more palatable. Now, in terms of cons, cost is obviously a significant one. We have to ensure that we're utilizing appropriately sourced and processed ingredients, because there is unfortunately a little bit of a higher risk of contamination because we don't have the kill step associated with canning or associated with extrusion. So understanding the implications and the potential risks of pathogens, you know, is really. So one of the more common questions that I get is looking at grain-free. And this is another example of marketing that has really distorted the reality and at times misled owners to the implications of nutrition. So we talk about grain-free, you know, we're talking about ingredients such as corn, soy, wheat, barley, oats, rice, so on and so forth. And there actually has been a large diversity of studies that shows that these animals can, not only cats but also dogs, can actually benefit and utilize different components of these nutrients. Now, we have to still remember that dogs and cats are different. Dogs are omnivores, cats are carnivores. So we can't lump them into the same bucket. And while process of manufacturing like extrusion can certainly make the ability of the animal to digest and absorb the nutrients better, that still doesn't necessarily always mean that it's nutritionally appropriate for the animal. So we need to always think about the animal first. What is the right nutrients for them? What is the right process to those nutrients? And making sure that it's applicable to the species. Feed them in the way that they were meant to be fed. If we consistently think about if the animal was eating in the wild, what would it be eating? What would be the nutritional